Hi, welcome. We're here in New York City for the World Cities Conference. I'm Valerie Steele of the museum at FIT. Vanessa?
I'm Vanessa Friedman, fashion director and chief fashion critic of the New York Times.
Eugene.
I'm Eugene Rabkin. I'm the founder and editor of StyleZeitgeist magazine.
So right now in the world, it's Paris Fashion Week, and we're here talking about fashion in different cities. So I thought we'd just start, Eugene, with your idea that fashion has to exist in the cities, that it's an innately urban phenomenon.
Yeah, I do believe that, and for me, the answer is twofold. I think that a city, in order for fashion to flourish, a city should have a populace and a sort of be a milieu that's tolerant to different types of fashion, to different modes of self-expression. And that tends to happen in cultural capitals, by and large. And second thing is that I think sometimes, the city planning itself can affect fashion, because certainly people dress one way in a walking city like New York, and they may dress a different way in a driving city like Los Angeles, just because there are fewer chance encounters, and the New York City sidewalks become sort of a runway for people to express themselves through what they wear.
What do you think, Vanessa?
I mean, I think, certainly cities inform the dress of their inhabitants, their architecture, their colors, their climate. I mean, we talk about New York versus LA, the sort of idea of tall skyscrapers in, gritty urban colors, and often, winter and sort of overcast skies, and you have a city full of people wearing black. And, then you go to LA and you have a city full of people, hiking in the mountains and swimming and wearing bright colors and, lighter fabrics. So there's that element to, how the actual geography of the place informs dress. And then there's the idea of, different tribes and people wearing clothing to signal their allegiance to a tribe, so that on a street, anyone who sees them can sort of call up a whole host of associations. You're a banker, you're a socialite, you're an artist, you're a journalist.
Yeah. Yeah, I once did a TV show going around New York City wearing the same outfit, but on the Lower East Side, I looked like a bourgeois lady. On the Upper East Side, I looked like a bohemian. I really didn't fit in the different areas. Well, if we think of fashion cities, I mean, there are a million cities now that have fashion shows around the world. You could probably spend the whole year doing that. Every city. But there are four big ones. And, I mean, starting with Paris and New York, I mean, what do you think, Vanessa, makes Paris and makes New York fashion cities? And how are they similar and how are they different?
I mean, honestly, I think it's industry, right? It's business. It's these were the places where people of wealth, gathered, assembled, because they were the centers of business. They were the centers of government. They were the centers of culture, as Eugene said. And therefore, around them grew up a whole kind of, sector to serve them, to dress them. And so you have the garment center and you have the ateliers, and this becomes this kind of virtuous circle. And then at a certain point you had collections and you had Fashion Week, which was, just a kind of trade show to, formalize what had been going on.
Yeah. I do think in a way Paris got lucky just because of where it's located. Not only because of its obviously deep tradition of fashion and it being the cultural capital of the 19th century, but if we talk about phenomena like the Antwerp Six or the English designers like John Galliano, Alexander McQueen, on the current generation of English designers, it's just much easier for them to get to Paris. And when they started out, they were all poor, and the Antwerp Six, they could load up a truck and just simply drive over to Paris. They couldn't really do something like that in New York. And while Paris already had this very creative fashion that was known for it, and that's where the Japanese decided to go.
Which, of course, was not an easy trip for them.
Exactly.
It's not an easy trip for them.
Paris is genius at marketing itself
Yes.
as the center of
Absolutely.
fashion. I mean, they really have spun that story and, and embraced it. There's always, I think, this tension around fashion and its sort of status as a serious art, right? And its kind of place in culture. And Paris as more than probably any other city, has really embraced that as part of its heritage, its patrimony. The fact that when you actually can physically go to shows there, they're in the courts of justice. Yes. They're like in every museum. I mean, like if there's a great architectural landmark in Paris, like there's a fashion show in it.
Yeah.
Fashion is always fashionable in Paris. I mean, and it has been at least since the 17th century. Yeah. So you have this tremendous heritage, and a heritage which is connected with the court. I mean, the court at Versailles was close by the city of Paris. You have the couture starting in Paris, and all of the mythology that went around the couture and the Parisienne.
And now you have LVMH, which is what the company with the largest market cap of any company in France.
Yes.
I mean, luxury just dominates that country, that city.
Yeah.
Whereas New York is different, though. I mean, New York, it has a river like the Seine and like the Thames. I mean, Milan has a river too. Apparently that was important in the early years to get goods in and out. And they were mercantile centers. New York was never a political center the way Paris was, but it was definitely the manufacturing center and the rich people's center.
The financial center.
Financial center,
Absolutely.
Exactly.
But also a cultural center.
Exactly.
And I do think you need the cultural class to drive fashion forward. It's not exclusive to fashion, but I think we need these people who are the first to take chances before fashion spreads.
They were late in New York, though. For a long time, it was Boston that was the cultural capital. But Boston was a very unfashionable city, the antithesis of a fashionable city.
Different kind of fashion.
My friend who taught at Harvard said her students all dressed like serfs.
Well, Ray Kawakubo might understand that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we have the runway shows, but we also have street style. What's the importance, do you think, of street style as part of what makes a city a world fashion city?
I mean, it's the idea of the flaneur, right?
Yeah, it's the idea of the flaneur. It's one of them. Someone who really enjoys people watching and taking in people as part of the city. And sort of someone being watched, themselves. And I do think a city affords that, and it's street style, as you guys very well know, it's become so mediated in front of fashion shows when influencers get paid to wear something. And outside of that, I think, the city street is the last thing that affords this sort of unmediated experience. And when you do have a chance encounter with someone, like Vanessa said, like from your tribe, you have this double take and you're like, yeah, this is, and there is something in that. And those are genuine city moments for me. You can't really do that out the window of your car.
No, and that was the great passion of Bill Cunningham, right, who was the famous New York Times photographer, and I would say and journalist, and kind of godfather of street style before it became this kind of weird game that we now consider it. And he really saw his role as a kind of cultural anthropologist.
Yes.
He was someone who recorded, like any photojournalist, identity at specific moments in time as expressed on the city streets. And he loved people who would dress, to really express themselves. And if you look back through his work, it really is, you're like, that's New York in the 80s, that's New York in the 90s,
Yes.
like that's New York in the recession, and that's downtown when downtown was really downtown.
Yes.
And it's fascinating.
It is, yeah. And it's something that I really wish that we don't lose.
Yes, I don't think that we will, because everybody who's young develops their own tribe and discovers it all for themselves. They discover fashion and sex and music as if nobody had ever known these things before.
Yeah, although social media is, I think, kind of messing with the idea of street style, because it's like street style that is being performed for the camera in a very different way than being performed for people you're passing by, as you go on your way to somewhere. It becomes a kind of end in itself, and I think that's sort of sapping it of some of its energy.
Yeah.
It seems to me you're right, but it probably doesn't necessarily have to do that, because the more knowledgeable you are about different kinds of fashion, in a way, the more you can play with it. When looking back at the cultural history of fashion in Paris, I was always struck by how many knowledgeable performers and spectators there were. If there was the dandy and the flaneur, there were also the little milliners who were sort of seen as the aristocrats of the working class. They knew how to make pretty things and dress up.
Yeah, I mean, I think you, it's the decontextualization of it that creates the problem. You know, that's what cities give you, and that's what streets give you. They like put everything in a place and a frame that is very specific. And when it's like the city of online, it's not the same.
Yeah.
Totally. The context is huge, and city provides context.
Well, and some cities provide more of a nurturing environment for street style, though. I mean, there's much better street style in Tokyo and London than there is in, say, Paris or Milan.
Yes.
And it really is much more commercial in Paris and Milan.
Right. Well, it's the rise of the street style photographer. I feel like that sort of group of, you know, like lemmings that kind of record everything, and you know, even though it started out being each photographer kind of having their own eye and bringing their own point of view to it, now, you know, if you go to shows, when shows come back, you know, if then all this comes back, you know, one photographer will see a person, and suddenly like this mass of them all like run and take the same picture. It's like, oh, if he likes it, then we must all like it.
Yes.
Which seems to me to defeat the purpose entirely.
Yeah, actually, some of the OG street style photographers that I know, they are moving away from that.
So where are they going?
They're starting to photograph commercially more and more, and they're becoming sort of art/commercial fashion photographers, and they don't want to be in the street anymore. And it's partly because of that, and partly because it's so mediated now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So most people, when they think of fashion cities, I think probably do think of runway shows. And I've seen some really brilliant shows, especially in Paris. But also, we were talking before about how the vast majority of shows are really kind of boring, unless it's your first time going to them. What do you think people need to do to make, if we go back to having shows again, and what do people need to do to make them more interesting?
I mean, I hope we do go back to having shows again, and, you know, not in the exact same form that we had them before, when we had these, you know, if you're talking about the kind of big ready-to-wear cycles that happen twice a year, where we go from, you know, New York to London to Milan to Paris for effectively 30 days, and you just have shows from like 9 in the morning to 9 at night. And it's this kind of endless, you know, like no evenings, no weekends, no time off, like endless parade of skirts. And at the end of it, you're like, wait, what do I remember? You know, and you only remember really a couple, right? Like,
absolutely.
Only a few things that stand out. And I think, you know, this is an opportunity for everyone to kind of rethink what that system looks like in the cities where it exists, because Fashion Week is really important to these cities. You know, it's an important economic contributor. It's important in terms of like identity. You know, I mean, what do you think, Eugene?
Yeah, absolutely. And so for me, the key word here is theater. Like if a fashion show is not theater, it maybe designers should rethink it. And by theater, I don't mean something like pompous in the palace, you know. A Margiela show in a parking lot or in an abandoned subway station, that was theater.
That was theater,
too.
yeah.
And so as a designer, you have twice a year, maybe 4 times a year, you have a chance to say something, and you should put all of your efforts in it, because after that, clothes are disassembled, they go to a store, and people don't get to hear that story. When it comes to the cities, I will say this, and I've written about this and made an enemy out of CFDA, but I think cities should take example from Florence, where PTO happens, where the city and the fashion work together, and the city opens up these incredible palaces to shows, because they don't think of fashion as frivolous, as an afterthought. They really think of it as a big business, which it is. And I think New York City should do the same.
So where? What would you open?
You know, New York Public Library.
Different shows in the public library.
Yeah.
But I feel like it should be sort of available. You know, it shouldn't be between a designer and the library. It should be between
the city could do more.
The city and the organization. You know, and that's what will make cities like New York more exciting, because we all know the problem. New York City does not attract creative talent on the scale London and Paris does. And I think opening up New York, we have incredible Art Deco buildings. We have incredible architecture that if we would open it up, I think fashion shows would be more exciting.
Well, that is an exciting part of a lot of European shows. You can get into amazing buildings.
Yeah, although in the end it does kind of rise or fall on the clothes, right? Like if the clothes suck, it doesn't matter how nice the building is.
No, to be sure, but I do think, I feel like we could do more in New York as a city.
I mean, I'm interested in the identities of the different fashion
Yes.
cities, you know, which are super stereotyped, but also a little bit true. You know, like you said, Paris is the really creative one. London is often like the new designer creative one. In New York is the commercial one. Milan was the trend one. But you know, I wonder if instead of thinking of it as like geographies, like these are New York designers, these are London designers, you know, the whole system could rethink it so it is more, in fact, like abstract identity almost. So like if you are a young designer, maybe London becomes the city where you show first, you know, and it's all young designers, no matter where they come from. You know, and Paris does become like the most theatrical, and maybe New York becomes more about sportswear or something. You know, I don't know, or streetwear.
Yeah.
You know, but that maybe is one way they could rethink a little bit, like how people wear clothes in a city, or you know, what the identity is, and how that relates to the runway.
Well, it's hard to break a historical pattern where, for example, New York is the capital of American fashion, and almost all American fashion is sold within the United States. So that would be different. A young designer in New York wouldn't necessarily want to go to Paris because his or her clientele would probably be mostly here.
I think a lot of them want to go to Paris.
No, sorry, they want to go to Paris, but it's a big struggle to be allowed to go there and to succeed there.
Yeah, although right now I think what's interesting is the Chambre syndicale is very interested in shoring up this historic identity of Paris as like the capital of all fashion, and they're being very welcoming for designers from other cities, because I think there's this kind of idea floating around that no one has quite been brave enough to articulate, but they're all sort of jockeying for it behind the scenes, that you know, maybe we will go down to one fashion city a season.
Yeah.
Right.
And in which case Paris is like, it's going to be us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, from the beginning, they've brought in world talent, from Charles Frederick Worth to Elsa Schiaparelli to Rei Kawakubo. They have overwhelmingly flooded into Paris. New York hasn't been too bad about welcoming, especially Asian designers, but it hasn't been, it's not really hand in glove with the government. And so CFDA is a little bit ambivalent about bringing in foreign designers here.
You know, it seems to me that the Chambre syndicale has much more power than the CFDA. You know, we like to think that the Council of Fashion Designers of America has some ability to influence, you know, the industry and Fashion Week, but really, like, they can suggest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No one has to pay any attention.
But maybe that idea that fashion is frivolous and sort of an afterthought, maybe that's the idea that should change.
Well, that's been a big strength of the French and the Italians, that they always have thought that fashion was extremely important for men as well as for women. It was something that smart people thought about. It wasn't just something that was a fluffy subject that dumb people were concerned with. And here, there has been a very puritanical history that fashion per se was a frivolous thing. Of course, you want to make money with your company, but that was something different. That's just seeing it as commercial.
I mean, I think right now, like the Black Lives Matter movement has, you know, created some real interesting kind of conversation and debate and opportunity for the U.S. in the sense that, you know, like this industry is actually, you know, it is diverse. And, you know, we have really exciting designers who are coming up, you know, from non-traditional backgrounds who are really, you know, disrupting American fashion. And, you know, maybe that's something that like the U.S. could embrace and be on the forefront of, in New York in particular, because this is the most extraordinarily diverse city.
Yes.
And, you know, really sort of take that in a way that like, you know, Paris with its kind of deep roots in, you know, very entrenched system can't.
That would be brilliant, because if New York could become, among other things, the capital of African diaspora fashion, that would be great, because there's so many great designers coming out of Lagos and South Africa and Senegal. You could have really fantastic people, not to mention all the African Americans, Caribbean Americans, Black British designers. That would be a very powerful statement.
Yeah. I mean, to me right now, some of the most exciting designers are, Telfar.
Yes.
I mean, they're all from Brooklyn, which makes me very happy. Telfar Clemens, Kirby Jean Raymond, who just got named head of Reebok.
Yes.
Virgil, okay, he's from Chicago, but, American. And, I think that that's a real opportunity for New York and, and something that is very connected to the identity of the city. And, we could really grab it if...
Well, Paris has been aware that by going for the African global diaspora, they can get some superstars, bringing them over there. But I think it nevertheless provides a real opportunity because New York, we don't have the heritage, we don't have the court, but we do have a sense of modernity and diversity, which is much more than you find in other cities.
And an embrace of the new. I mean,
Exactly.
French fashion is all, let's find an old heritage name and revive it.
Yeah.
And that it actually doesn't really work in the U.S.
Yeah. But I think that embrace of the new does not happen on institutional level here. I think it happens exactly on street level and on youth culture level, and that's why youth culture is so important. And talk about Hood by Air and Telfar, they did not come up through the New York fashion system, like not even close. It's then the system embraced them and took its sweet time doing so.
Yeah.
But then they were like, we don't even need the system.
Exactly. Well, it's interesting. I mean, Hood by Air was so exciting and then kind of went into a hiatus. So is that coming back now?
He's bringing it back.
Yes.
He's bringing it
That's
back.
very exciting because those shows were amazing.
Yeah, they were a lot of fun, and they were so New York. They were very New York. But again, I want to bring the idea of culture as counterculture, and I think a lot of really great art and fashion has come up as counterculture, as driving against this really puritanical, with Puritan origins culture, really conservative culture, and fighting against that. And fashion can do that as well. And I think New York has been traditionally this city where a lot of creative people sort of fled to in order to express themselves. And I hope we don't lose that.
Yes, I mean, people have come, so many designers from Indiana and the Vowel States to come to New York to find some kind of creative home.
I mean, what do you see at FIT? Because it is a kind of gathering place, right?
Yeah, well, FIT, the students are so talented, and they are a very diverse bunch. A lot of them are children of immigrants. A lot of them are working class, first person in their family to go to college. And they, of course, have that fashion fanaticism that sort of from the age of 3 when they had their crayons, they were becoming obsessed with the idea of fashion. So they are really talented. I'm just hoping that the structure of the fashion industry can be flexible enough to accommodate so many talented people when so far it's been very much a hierarchy. You had a few slots for the head person, and then everyone else was sort of proletarianized.
I mean, one thing we haven't talked about at all is shopping, and like
Yes.
shopping place, because I mean, like the idea of shopping streets, and which is also street style, and people kind of parading up and down in front of, whether they're kind of cool underground stores that that used to be downtown, or like what's going on Madison Avenue, and I wonder like what role do shops play, and is it going to come back? Because right now shops are in so much trouble.
Yeah, but I think I think it will come back. Like I wrote this opinion piece for Business of Fashion that argued once this will all blow over, we're gonna be back to business. And we've been here before. Okay, there were different types of crises, but we've been here before. And 2 weeks ago, I went to Soho. It was like sort of the first days of fall weather, and it was packed. People willing to wait online to go into stores because of social distancing. They can't enter. There are people willing to wait online for like half an hour to an hour to walk into a store and spend money. And so many of them were young kids. That was fascinating.
Which stores, like Supreme?
Anything from Dior and Chanel, like down to like Everlane. It was an entire spectrum. Babe, definitely all the streetwear stores. They all had lines outside.
That's really encouraging. I mean, because my favorite store, Toto Kaela, went out of business in the pandemic, And I think independent stores, like independent designers, are super vulnerable to a big economic crisis.
Yeah, I mean, the end of Barney's, I'm still mourning the end of Barney's, you know, the end of Totokayo, Jeffrey.
Yes.
You know, I mean, there were some really fantastic independent boutiques that, you know, that I used to go to, not so much to buy anything, but just to look at it, you know, almost to see what they were curating, to, you know, see who they had discovered, like as a kind of source. And I miss that, and I sort of worry about that. I wonder where that sort of point of view has gone.
No, absolutely. But I do think that Barney's lost it in the past 10 years. I do believe it's become overly commercial, and that was part of its demise. Where you're absolutely right. Like, I used to run, like, in the beginning of every season to Barney's, like, what do they have? You know, as a fashion fan, that's where you used to go.
Sure, Julie Gilhart found so many new, emerging, creative people.
Yeah.
That's what you would hope merchants would be doing.
Yeah, but you're absolutely right. The demise of independent stores is a serious, you know, it's a serious problem, because a lot of these luxury monobrand boutiques, you actually don't even like feel that nice when you're in there. You kind of feel watched and you kind of feel judged. And I never got that at a store like Totokawa or at Barney's, for that matter.
And I wonder about department stores, because department stores were so much a part of New York. I mean, like, I grew up here, and I used to go with my grandmother to Lord & Taylor's, and we'd go look at the windows. Every Christmas, we'd like line up, you know, with other people to sort of see what was in the windows. And, you know, we'd go to Bergdorf's, go to Bloomingdale's. It was like a rite of passage, and also a kind of, again, like community ritual. And department stores are so challenged right now, and I wonder what that will do to like the city and fashion in the city.
I mean, the department stores help make New York and Paris be fashion centers, because it wasn't just manufacturing here. That was where you went to shop, and people would come in at Christmas and go shopping and make special trips. But I don't know if the structure of shopping, whether people are just going to be lured away to having Amazon drop things off for them.
Because it's really like another tourist destination for a city, right? Like stores are, they're places, they're like destinations, you say, for you know, people from out of town. It was like a New York ritual.
Well, that's what I always love about Tokyo, which in my mind is really also one of the ultimate fashion
Shangri-La.
cities. Because Shangri-La, because it's all new. It's not just what you find in every other big city. And you find new neighborhoods and new stores popping up constantly. I sent a text to someone, and she didn't know if it was from me, and she said, "Are you really Valerie Steele? Prove it. What was your favorite store when we went shopping in Tokyo?" And I wrote, "Dog." And she said, "Oh, it's you."
Yeah.
Because it was just crazy, these little stores which were amazing.
Yes.
Young people with creative ideas, not much money, but they found fabulous things.
Yes. But again, it goes back to the fabric of the city. Tokyo's rents are not that high. You could do an independent store here. It's impossible to do that in New York now, because the rents are
maybe
insane.
Soon. Right.
Maybe soon.
Maybe
yeah, we'll
this could
see.
be something good that comes out of the pandemic. Is like as everyone starts fleeing their buildings, and you know, and big you know, and high rents, and rents come down. Maybe that creates an opportunity to kind of reinvent some of this.
Oh, I wish. That would be great. Instead of everyone just taking a loss on the empty storefronts, which
Exactly.
they do so much of. What about the world of fashion cities? I mean, because now you could spend every day of the year going from Mumbai to Sao Paulo to, you know, Moscow to St. Petersburg to Kiev. Everywhere has fashion cities. What role do all of those cities have, apart from being economic drivers for the city, because people will spend money while they're there, and also a prestige thing? I mean, Berlin, for example. I'm dying to actually go to Berlin Fashion Week, just because I want to see what the hell it's like.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't been to too many outside of the major cities. In the ones I've been to, you know, there is definitely a very local feeling to it, and sometimes you feel like, well, yeah, you're punching above your weight, and sometimes you like, you guys have a long way to go, and I really don't know what the answer is. I think it's great that people are trying, but you know, the measure of success, I'm not sure.
I mean, I think there's a difference between cities that have like a real garment industry, where you know, you are effectively having a trade show that you are then, you know, exporting to the world, and then cities who want to use the image of fashion as the export to the world, which
Yes.
is less about the actual product than the idea of sort of reframing your identity. You know, like I went to a fashion week in Colombia, and you know, I mean, the fashion, the products themselves were kind of the least important part of it. It was really about kind of re-spinning the kind of meaning of Colombia on the, you know, on the global stage. It was like sort of moving the narrative away from drugs, essentially, and into clothes, you know, and into creativity. And I think for a lot of these kind of secondary or, you know, or third levels of fashion cities, it really is about, again, like tourism and exporting image more than actual business.
Yeah. I'm thinking Mexico City, a lot of the clothes weren't even made, but it provided a great social gathering and then opportunities for people, restaurants to make money, etc. But then Kiev, even though it wasn't Fashion Week, it was like Fashion Weekend, it was punching above its weight.
Oh, yeah.
They were some people there who were really driven to make interesting things. And they kind of ruthlessly cut out all the old designers and said, nope, nope, we're going to find young and really cool designers.
Yeah, and from what I hear, Tbilisi is kind of like that in Georgia, and that's the one I really want to go to at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that's extraordinary about fashion is because as an art form, it is relatively accessible. I mean, you know, what do you need?
Yes.
You need some fabric and you need a needle and thread or some way to like shape it. You know, it becomes, like it's present in even the most sort of challenged circumstances, you know, and because it allows this universal human sort of need, desire to, you know, to express yourself, to decorate yourself, to kind of communicate to the world who you are, you know, it's everywhere. And, you know, places in Israel, in Palestine, in Afghanistan, you know, there's fashion.
Sure.
Sometimes you find an incredibly fashionable place like Tokyo where the structure of the fashion industry seems to be trying to just tamp it down. It's all these middle-aged men in suits who run everything in Tokyo. And a lot of the hippest and most interesting designers are kind of like, we don't even want to be part of this system. It's very interesting. You keep thinking, why aren't they opening it up a little bit?
Absolutely. I went to Tokyo Fashion Week once by coincidence because it's just the time I went to Tokyo, and then they were like, oh, there's Fashion Week. And so I went to a couple of shows, and it was literally the least exciting Fashion Week I've been to, but it's the most exciting fashion city. So there is this disconnect. And I know they're trying to sort of revamp it. And I thought, well, then you shouldn't probably have a fashion show like on top of a mall. You know, again, you should open up your city, but you're absolutely right, Valerie. And I think it comes from that idea a bit of counterculture.
Yeah.
Because like Undercover, like for a long time, or like the Soloists, like they wouldn't be caught dead, you know, they really wanted to work against that.
Yeah.
Well, there's always this tension in fashion, right, between the kind of pure creativity and commerce.
Sure.
Which is what makes it interesting, is you have to actually balance the two, you know, and this question of like a garment that you can wear, and then who gets to define what wearable garment is, right? Because like Rei Kawakubo's wearable garment is maybe not, you know, Ralph Lauren's wearable garment.
Yeah.
But you know, I think there is room for both.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there have been so many actually really creative designers in New York, even though the image of New York fashion is relentlessly commercial and just sportswear oriented. It makes me crazy when French colleagues say, well, there really isn't any fashion in New York. And it's like, yeah, there is. There is.
That was when the reason originally why New York Fashion Week, which used to come a week after all the European shows, like hopscotch to the front of the line. And it was because the American designers got so tired of having every European designer say, well, oh, you had to come after us because you had to see what we were doing so you could then rip it off and do your bad copy of it. So they're like, we're going to go first to show you that like these are our ideas, they're not your ideas.
But also didn't like Helmut Lang drive a lot of that? Didn't he decide
Calvin Klein, actually.
Calvin Klein.
Yeah, it was Calvin, I think, and then Helmut also.
Yeah, that was a very interesting switch, just the lineup in the big four, moving New York from last to first. And
bane of all of our existence.
But again, like the structure of the city does play a role here, because did you guys think that it kind of lost its sizzle a bit when it moved from Bryant Park and up to Lincoln Center? And a lot of people like didn't really want to like schlep that far.
Well, it's funny because that space was so awful. It was like a non-place, like an airport.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I loved Bryant Park because it was so Garmento, and also because there were so many subways everywhere, and like we don't have cars, we use the subway, and it felt like part of New York, you know. And I guess to a certain extent, Lincoln Center is still part of New York and Spring Studios, you know. But Bryant Park, I think, really did feel kind of like plunked down right in the middle of the city. You know, you couldn't avoid it. And yeah, it was sort of sad when it left.
Well, that was interesting because the locals really felt they were being locked out. And there was a sense that fashion people were just saving all the fun for themselves. And why weren't they letting ordinary people in? That was a really hard to get people to understand that it's work. It wasn't just fun watching the shows.
Yeah.
It's still hard to get people to understand.
Yes, yes, very
like,
much
stop complaining, stop complaining. Your life is so glamorous. And you're like, yeah, tell me that at 3 in the morning when I'm filing my copy.
Right.
But I do, you know, I think the thing about Fashion Week is no matter how hard everyone tries to centralize it in any city, you know, designers just do not want to play in the same sandbox.
No.
I mean, like they you know, they created the equivalent of Bryant Park in the Louvre. Like, how could you not want to be part of that? You know, as soon as they did that, designers were like, oh, forget that.
Yes, exactly.
Go off to this like weird arrondissement in Paris and have our own show.
Yeah.
That's right. It's true. That's a perfect example. If you had a great space, but you didn't want to be like everybody else.
Yeah, but it does get tiring at some point, and like we do grumble when you have to go to like the 20th arrondissement.
No, it's ridiculous, and the sheer amount of like carbon footprint used by everyone trying to go everywhere in a city for these fashion weeks is ridiculous. And I really hope that, you know, one of the things that all this talk about sustainability in fashion, you know, will result in is people finally getting on board with at least some sort of organization of Fashion Week to help the city's air.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Paris traffic is like notoriously horrible. We've all been on it. Where I've resorted to, I just take the metro or I ride the bike at this point because it's just faster and there's much less carbon footprint.
No, I like bikes too, but like Fashion Week and the shoes and the bikes, it's not like not great.
Well, so you're looking forward to a real Fashion Week coming back again?
Very much so. Very, very much so, because there's just no substitute. Again, like I said, this is one chance for a designer to really present something that puts together the clothes, the makeup, hair, venue, music.
A story.
A story. It's a storytelling experience, and that's the juice of fashion. There's just no way you can get around that in my mind. But also there is the camaraderie of, you know, you get to a show.
You see everybody.
You see everyone.
You hear all the gossip.
You hear all the gossip, and like, yes, like we spend an inordinate amount of time like waiting.
Twiddling your thumbs.
Yeah. But there is also that, you know,
That's when you chat with your friends. That's when you.
You and I have spoken more, I think, in Paris.
Far more than here.
than here in New York, and I think the social aspect of a Fashion Week like cannot be underestimated.
I mean, I hope that it comes back, but in a slightly different form. I mean, I really do think like this has been an extraordinarily hard period for, you know, for businesses, for designers, for humanity. And to think that we're just going to go back to the way it
should
was
be
before
better.
would really be a lost opportunity.
Not just back to normal. It should be go to something better.
You know, so maybe, and I think, you know, I agree. Like as a community, it's really nice to be in a place together. You know, certainly for the cities, and you know, the New York City economy is currently, you know, in incredible trouble. You know, Fashion Week is really important. It was bringing in between $600 and $900 million a year for the city's economy. You know, for hotels, for restaurants, for taxi drivers, for, you know, hot dog manufacturers, sort of like my food stuff. You know, but maybe, you know, maybe we could do something where, as you say, like the city opens up, you know, some of its extraordinary venues, and we have kind of presentations during the day, and people can get around to them in a more coordinated fashion. And then you save 2 hours or 3 hours every night for a real show. You know, we just kind of recalibrate and rethink, you know, what a fashion week should be.
Thank you so much for being here for World Cities. This is really, really fun. I'm glad to see you both in New York.
Yes, yes. My pleasure.
Thank you,
Valerie.
Thank you.